Ognian Kassabov is associate professor of philosophy in Sofia University. His main areas of interest into the history of aesthetics in its intersection with political thought and philosophy of nature. His habilitation monograph is entitled Technique of Nature, Organics of Art, The Birth of Aesthetics in the Depth of Natural Beauty. He maintains an interest in German philosophy from Kant to Marx, his dissertation having explored the systematic aesthetics in Kant and Hegel. Kassabov has co-edited an anthology of modern theories of civil society from Hobbes to Dewey, one on structural violence and human dignity, as well as one on collective memory about Bulgaria in pre-1944 history. In addition, he has translated into Bulgaria a number of key shorter philosophical texts, including Leibniz's New System of Nature, Clarke's Letters to Leibniz, some of Goethe's botanical studies, Marx's economical philosophical manuscripts, and Wittgenstein's Notes on Fraser. The title of today's lecture is The Vast Graveyard of Human Race, Kant from the Future of Warfare. Ognian, thank you for coming, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. The mic is working. Okay. Thanks for having me here. Thanks to the organizers of this conference. And as I said to a couple of the people that I talked to, it's really nice that we have a conference that's not only exploring a very serious topic in history of philosophy, but it's, as the opening statements of the conference said, it's also very much related to what's going on in the world right now. So without further ado, I'm going to start. And it's actually uncanny and somewhat not so happily ironical that we have this conference on a philosopher who's like the paradigmatic philosopher of peace, but most of the talks are about war. And my talk is going to be about war too. There are different kinds of wars. And yeah, this is something uncanny, but as we saw yesterday in the debate in Tzedek Club, there is also an uncanny irony of geography. Maybe Kaliningrad has not only the birthplace of Kant, not only an irritating governor who said such and such about him, but also it's the port of the Kaliningrad Oblast is the port of the Russian Baltic Fleet, and it's a very, very strategic location, as actually this very fine essay by Lea Ypi in Financial Times in April referred to that fact too. As I was reading Financial Times in 2022, there was also an irony of art. It was said I'm doing some aesthetics, but as I was reading an article about the idyllic Swedish island where World War II could start, I had this really strange sensation. Well, I've seen World War II start on this island, and I'm referring to Soviet director Tarkovsky's last film, which is actually filmed on Gotland, and it's about the eruption of nuclear World War III, between obviously the West and the Eastern Bloc, and it's a strange thing. And obviously, I'm starting with what's in the abstract. I'm not going to read it, but you well remember that the very first sentence of the essay on perpetual peace refers to the grave, and it's Kant says it's a fine thing. There was this innkeeper whose pub, he had this sign, zum ewigen Frieden, or I guess in Dutch, but at the eternal peace, and the sign depicted a graveyard. And so this is not only an isolated thing, because as we read the text, at two crucial points, Kant refers to the common grave of mankind, or of those who wage war. So first I'm going to read out the two passages that this happens apart from the introductory one. So in preliminary Article 6, and I'm shortening it, here Kant refers to the fact that some trust between the warring parties and some trust in their eventual disposition for peace is needed. So he says some trust in the enemy's way of thinking must still remain even in the midst of war, since otherwise no peace can be concluded and the hostilities would turn into a war of extermination. And actually, here I should say, this is not Vernichtungskrieg, this is not total war. The term Kant uses is Ausrottungskrieg, a war of eradication, or if we use literal translation. So, in this war of extermination, the simultaneous annihilation of both parties, and with it of all right as well, can occur, and this would let perpetual peace come about only in the vast graveyard of the human race. So here, this is like a total, a war of a complete extermination of the human race. Obviously, Kant was not referring to nuclear warfare, but this rings strangely relevant. Second reference to this, a vast grave, that's in a way a counterpoise to the idea of perpetual peace. In the definitive Article 2, in which he argues that the principle of international laws should be federalism and not the jus ad bellum. So here I'm kind of changing on translation, but he says, the concept of a law of nations as that of the law to go to war is strictly speaking unintelligible. One would have to mean by it that it is quite right if human beings so disposed destroy one another and thus find perpetual peace in a vast grave that covers all horrors of violence along with their authors. Actually, similar things Kant says in paragraphs 56 and 57. He doesn't refer to a grave, but he refers to war of extermination using the Latin term he borrowed. I'm not going to dwell on that, but yeah, I find it interesting that in his notes on Achenwald's legal doctrine, he lays out, so to speak, the legal structure or the lack of legal structure of this type of war, the war of extermination, that does not leave the door for stable peace. So first, not only no trust, but also no universality. So in that sense, the principle under which the warring party, acts is not recognized by my enemy and vice versa. Second, I wage war not in order to settle a dispute or to subsume, here Kant goes logical, to subsume in my way under a common good principle, but in order to achieve supremacy. So this would bring about a general will of extermination and an unending war, both in extent and extent between countries, among countries, but also in extent with respect to time, so in perpetuity. It will uproot the Gesinnung zum Frieden. Then acts of disruption and murder during time of peace, relative peace, further contribute to this lack of disposition for peace and suggest that there is no security, I can't use that term, except when you eliminate the enemy. So only only that war is just, which is compatible with the disposition for future peace. So in that sense, that reading of exterminatory war is actually in line with Arthur Ripstein's magisterial account of the law of war from 2021. Perpetual peace is a regulative idea systematically organizing the philosophical, moral, and legal significance of war. So, summary of Kant's outline for a theory of exterminatory war. No possible universally agreed principle of right in view. So, no mutual trust, no respect, no recognition. Something that I guess would be problematic in Hegel's theory of war. Then, unending war with no resolution and mutual destruction becomes possible. Actually, here, Kant, if we look closely, suggests that in such a situation, the strong party would aim at the extermination of the other party, whereas the relatively weaker party would engage in acts of disruption such as spying, assassinating, and so on and so forth. But then this also, here I'm making things short, but this also suggests that perpetual war and perpetual peace are processes, they are not states. So in a way, they are processes that are, in a way, so for example, if we think of history as driven towards perpetual peace, we have to wage war in certain ways so that it doesn't become a war of extermination. Whereas if we wage a war in certain other ways that I just described, we make perpetual peace less and less possible. And actually, as far as I get from the abstracts, Bojana Jovicevic's afternoon talk would be on perpetual peace as such a process, and it's nice that there are some overlaps in the talks of this conference. Actually here there is a really nice quote from Hobbes on war and how time is involved in the very concept of war. Hobbes says, I'm not going to read it out maybe for discussion, but he says war is not just actual fighting, is the disposition to resolve conflicts by military or violent devices. So another thing is that, to flesh out this theory, is that for Kant, it seems that a possible war of extermination not only, so to speak, empirically could negate or destroy humans, but the very notion, the very concept of right. And maybe that's on the one side, with the empirical destruction of humans, there will be no other, at least on Earth, rational animal to uphold any concepts, but also the way a war is waged, it kind of negates that concept. So it's not only about the outcome, but also about the internal principle. So then I move to what I'm saying, what I'm calling after Alan Wood's provocative 1998 article about Kant's historical, so-called historical materialism, the material preconditions for such development, exterminatory warfare. I think those preconditions are not irrelevant to the conceptual structure, but they flesh it out. So Kant says a lot about not only about how war should be waged, but also about how war is waged, and in a way, his philosophy of history says a lot about how ideas emerge, but it cannot ground those ideas, but it can help us understand their significance and the likelihood that those ideas would actually hold out, that reason would be actualized, if you will. So, in a way, Professor Zdravko Kobe several times referred to the fact that Kant says actually some, or at least gives hints about some of the institutional preconditions for perpetual peace. So we should think about the material preconditions about war of extermination. So here I could, the hints are not that many, obviously, but two things should be said. On the one hand, Kant in the Guarantee for Perpetual Peace recalls how war makes humans spread all around the globe, but also this leads to, even as early as in the idea for universal history, to a globalization of war and injustice. And you have, going back to perpetual peace, the situation where a violation of right in one place of the earth is felt in all, something that we heard about in Roberto Picardi's talk, and I didn't realize it's not only about disposition, but it's also, as you said, about material interdependence, or maybe that's Kant's main point, as you urged. So, but Kant says, well, this harms the spirit of commerce, something that we discussed in the discussion after your talk. But there are a lot of buts here. In the idea for universal history, Kant mentioned the fact of the new invention of endless depth, And it seems that at this point, he thinks that this is a self-defeating financial practice. So you fund war, you borrow more. And he said here, shortening the quote, that's from Proposition 8, an ever-increasing burden of debt, which is a new invention, he says, will make war so dubious an undertaking. But also, he says, war would also become very artificial, so rational states would no longer be willing to wage such a war. But in Perpetual Peace, he says that, well, maybe this can work out. So a credit system, here I'm quoting once more, of debts growing out of sight and yet always secured against present demand. The ingenious invention of a commercial people in the century is a dangerous power of money, namely a treasury for carrying on war that exceeds the treasuries of all other countries or all other states taken together. So you have not only financial interdependence, but you have like one center that accumulates a lot of debt, but also obviously a lot of military power here. And yes, so on and so forth. So he says this seems to be one of the preliminary articles on standing armies. He says, not on standing armies, sorry, the fourth one on debt. He says this should be abolished. So it suggests that, this situation suggests that if a state or a group of states is capable of achieving some sort of disproportional financial concentration, and also of linking economic power to defense spending, which says, well, the state can actually use those debts to finance its economy and growth and so on and so forth, then this practice of financing war with more and more debt would not be so self-defeating, and that's why we need this preliminary Article 4. So what do we make of all this? What are the prospects of exterminatory war or its converse, perpetual peace? First, we should say that in some respect, part of the material preconditions for the two are very similar, or at some points seem to be identical. It's about globalization, financialization, and growth of commerce, and this interlinking between the economies of different countries. So Kant's guarantee for perpetual peace, which seems to, in a way, edge on both the beneficent power of commerce, which he already kind of made us skeptical to, and also on the beneficent side effects of war itself. In a way, it doesn't give a guarantee, like a secure guarantee, and this is somewhat ironical too. Once more, Leahy has suggested that here we don't think of nature as a guarantee for a perpetual peace like the natural world, but a human nature. And Kant says nature as a mechanism of human inclinations itself. So human nature then can be modified by humans themselves. But then it seems that in his late works close to perpetual peace, Kant is somewhat, that's a strong word, but he's not obsessed, but he comes back to various doomsday scenarios, not only these three ones from Perpetual Peace, but also if we look at the wording at the conclusion of Metaphysics of Morals, he says, well, there is, in a way, a metaphysical doomsday if perpetual peace is not possible. So that would mean to admit that the moral law within us is itself deceptive, and this would call forth in us the wish, which arouses our abhorrence, rather to be rid of all reason and to regard ourselves as thrown by our principles into the same mechanism of nature as other species of animals. On the political level, if we go back to Perpetual Peace, there is a similar passage regarding a certain sort of politics which produces the trouble it predicts, throwing human beings into one class with other living machines, which only to be aware that they are not free in order to become, in their own judgment, the most miserable of all beings in the world. And then on a personal level, if we look at paragraph 87 of the Critique of Power of Judgment, he says that, using the figure of Spinoza, and here he goes theological, but it's important to see that in his late works he often relates war and peace, those type of problems, not only to politics and economics, but also to the issues of hope and religion. So once more, he says that, well, if we lose hope in some sort of God or future life and so on and so forth, we would see humans just like the other animals on Earth suffer all injustices and so on and so forth. I'm paraphrasing here. And things will always remain thus until one wide grave engulfs them all together back into the abyss of the purposeless chaos of matter from which they were drawn. So this also relates to teleology. But if we are mere machines, then there will be nothing so wrong about waging war and waging exterminatory war in itself in the first place. So there are practical grounds to believe, or rather hope, in God, providence, and peace. Yet, if we look at the essay on the end of all things, which is from the same period, Kant at least seems to admit that there are some reasons to fear a terrible end of the world. Insofar we're not disposed to realize our end as rational beings. And in a way, here he also there is a footnote figure of the in that comes in another context, maybe, like this world as a indulgent and, pardon my French, but in a way crappy place, because he refers to this, he found this mystic from the Orient who thought maybe this world is the toilet of other worlds. But another bad version of our world that he quotes is an Oriental caravanserai, which is like an inn where people go, eat, go to the toilet, leave, and there is no sense to that story, much maybe like the situation with the Dutch inn. Obviously, like the caravanserai and the inn are images relating to the allure and the power of commerce also. So how does this dangerous development of culture, which, going back to the essay on the end of all things, refers to a situation where luxury proliferates, where oppression and war without a proportional progress in the actualization of justice are the case. So if we look once more back to the critique of power of judgment, paragraph 83, which I think is like really important for understanding Kant's late combination between teleology, economics, some economics, and some, obviously, political theory aiming at perpetual war. He says that an infinite growth, well, he doesn't use those terms, but the proliferation of luxury and infinitely proliferating desires. And he uses once more maybe Hobbesian, maybe Mandevillean theory of human desires. So he says, in our nature, human nature, we are not is not of the sort to call a halt anywhere in possession and enjoyment to be satisfied. So this results in what he calls the barbarism of war. Human beings working hard for the destruction of their own species, so this recurring topic. So if we have what he calls a culture of skill with no culture of discipline, so the culture of skill refers to what we would call technological progress, but with what he calls, doesn't once more use that term, but he says the differences between the ruling class and the lower classes becomes greater and greater, so rising inequalities. So given no cosmopolitan hope, we can only count on the beneficent effects of war, while the hope, once more quote, for perpetual state of happiness among nations recedes ever further. So if this is not extinguished, the trends, even the idea is not extinguished, the trends make its actualization more in the distant future. So, to conclude, I see I'm running out of time. I wanted to, even though I believe it's somewhat clear by now that as part of Kant's hints and part of the way he links all those issues can be very much relevant in thinking about today's situation. I mean, in my abstract, I said, well, I'm going to talk about Hegel, but there are enough. We already heard one talk about him, and there will be at least two more tomorrow about Hegel's critique of Kant's theory of peace. But it seems, and there have been papers on that Hegel didn't think that war could go exterminatory. So he thought that more or less it will be a political affair and it will be civilized. But I think that from what we hear from Kant, he said, well, there are reasons to believe that things could seriously go wrong, and we could see them going seriously wrong right now in our contemporary situation. So obviously recent years, recent decades have had us witness massive military campaigns by some of the most advanced armies in the world, which seem to target without second thought civilians, medical facilities and critical infrastructure, something that obviously Kant excluded from the war, from the his interpretation of the jus in bello. So what about the preconditions for war of extermination that I tried to delineate? The debt and the economy, we can see that global finance and a profitable transnational military-industrial complex has risen, and also that financial aid and technological exchange that intertwine the political and military fates, or rather the political/military fates of certain countries is makes them closer than ever before. So with respect to the preliminary articles to Perpetual Peace, there was actually a pretty, it was a really short and not very philosophical, but still I think pretty worthwhile essay by Jeffrey Sachs, who said, oh, it's high time we abolished, if not standing armies, but then at least international military bases, but also, it was an essay on Kant's Perpetual Peace, but also financing armies with debt. Another thing that could be said with respect to those preliminary articles, and some of the definitive ones, this democratic peace theory, at least from the part of international relations scholars and political theory scholars, as Georg Kavalar has recently shown in his book 2020, that it has been used, at least politically, to justify questionable military interventions and double standards to which also Professor Kobe referred, double standards that the West has employed. So the issue of spies and assassinations brings us to the very current issue of digital surveillance, which is both on massive scale on civilians, but also on world leaders, something that Kant very naively thought could be banned, you know, but right now it's here. Also, this situation in which the strong aim at extermination, while the weak engage in activities which would be classified as terrorist, is very much the case today. With respect to the definitive articles, and here I'm almost done, we could see the return. I mean, a lot of people have mentioned that in the public space, the return of great power politics and the danger of the rule-based international order. But if we go back to Kant, he doesn't care much about any rule-based international order. He cares for a certain set of rules that should be universally recognized ones, and that set the basis for the possibility of for a possibly just war. So, for example, if a lot of powerful countries agree that a certain government has the right to defend its country by any and all means, that means we're in a very, very bad place. And Ripstein, going back to Ripstein once more, he very convincingly, I think, argues that the new asymmetrical and terrorist conflicts do not absolve actors from responsibilities under the law of war, even if their enemies are deemed unjust. And this is a concept, by the way, which Kant finds very problematic. So, and my last point, the technological asymmetry, which leads to civilizational arrogance of what Kant calls culture of skill. It has led to massive industrial, maybe, levels of dehumanization, and as Kant argues that campaigns of conquest and colonization have counted the inhabitants of the countries, the local population, as nothing, and this has enabled them, or at least in their eyes justified their actions. So today maybe we see the danger of humans being reduced from not to mere machines as Kant feared, but to mere material out of the abyss of purposeless chaos of matter that he referred to. So thank you.
Thank you again. Do we have any questions already? Okay, Greg, what was? Well, okay, I'll start then if Gregor is uncertain. The question that came to my mind is, well, it's a bit of a lateral question, but I was wondering about the origin. Do you know anything about the origin of the title Ewigen Frieden? So could it perhaps be the case that the anecdote came first and then the title was chosen? Because, I mean, the way, if the metaphor of the motive of the graveyard and the anxiousness over the exterminatory war is really is in fact so constitutive for Kant's case, as you made a convincing case. So if Kant's concern is really very much preventive, so it's very much motivated by the more or less actual threat of war, of maybe exterminatory war, and all the points that you pointed to about how it's constitutive to believe in perpetual peace, otherwise we lose hope, become animals. Well, in a sense, that would point that he does not really believe in any Ewigkeit, this freedom. It's precisely not eternal. It's always the danger, the threat of war is always there in order to constitute it. So, in that sense,
making him into Hegel.
I don't know, maybe, yeah, but yes, but okay, there's it's a way to say Kant, yes. So, in that sense, that would mean that the very title would be a bit ironic, because it would point to how we cannot have. We have to believe in eternal peace, perpetual peace, precisely because we know that we cannot have, precisely because at the same time we have to also believe in the threat of war as a motivation for it. So it's kind of disavowed belief. So we believe in perpetual peace in order to avoid
war, which means that precisely the perpetualness of peace is never truly achieved. Okay, that was a bit more complicated than I imagined, but so what do you say about that?
Obviously, the title is ironic, and as some people have said, something like really obvious in the German. There's at least one more level of irony that it could be literally translated. If you go to a pub and it says "at the perpetual peace," it's not towards. It's you're there. So you're zum ewigen Frieden. So perpetual peace is the inn, but the inn depicts a graveyard. So obviously the innkeeper, if he was a real guy, he was like a joker. So come to my place, drink a lot, and go to. I don't know, but yeah. So I think you made a really fine point that for Kant, not only do we have to like keep this hope, but also we have to keep this fear and like keep them maybe together, keep the hope and work towards. And he says, well, we should behave as if it was possible, even if it's not. But we should also keep an eye open for the radically perverse, as he calls, end of all things in this common graveyard. And yeah, so I think this is correct. But also, it's not about some sort of existential or philosophical only treatment or religious, individually religious feeling of hope and hopelessness or fear, but it's also about some work that we have to do, as I said, but also about thinking about the trends in this world that could lead to either directions. That being said, you started this question from where it comes from, and I've not done my homework enough. I mean, it comes from a treatise of Leibniz that I've not read, and it comments the original debate on perpetuel that started with Saint-Pierre. But so this is like a hidden quote from Leibniz, and I don't know what Leibniz made with this. So maybe somebody would.
Okay, so okay, Corina then, and then Gregor.
Thank you. That was very interesting. I was just wondering, so whether at the end of the day, Kant is part of the solution or part of the problem here. And that's so, since if I got you right, you were emphasizing the importance of teleology, history, and hope. And so the last conference I was to was at Catania, and I was then listening to talk of Eva Warebska-Demanovic, who was actually saying so in line of with all the people who are criticizing Kant for his late writings, which are, of course, as you might know, the racist writings. So that exactly teleology and progress could be problematic concepts in that context. And that might be mirrored in something that you mentioned. And now describing the situation today, of course, then after the Second World War, there was this fear of total extermination by a nuclear war. But then the international order kind of stabilized and had as its main aim then to secure territorial integrity and political sovereignty, so non-interference. But, and that's Doyle, so that democracies don't wage war against each other, but they waged a lot of wars under the label of humanitarian intervention into other parts of the world. And that was exactly guided by this principle, so that they should be democratized, stabilized, and so on. So that was the idea. But in reality, I mean, if we look at empirical facts, this didn't happen. And even so, I mean, if you say Kantianism is kind of the spirit of European and Western, in general, Western foreign policy, then you have stuff like the Second Iraq War and all this, so which was then justified in this terminology that you have to intervene there because there's like an uncivilized dictator and it has to like be made better and more progressive and more democratic and so on. And in the end, that brought a lot of suffering to civilian population. And in terms of credibility of this whole story and this whole system, it might have already collapsed in some way. So I just wanted you to comment a bit on this like critical side of discussion. People who would say Kant is not part of the solution, that whole thinking is part of the problem of perpetual warfare in other terminology of humanitarian intervention. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, here I'm not going to say anything original because I think like Georg Kavalar's book pretty much discredited this Kantian reading of the democratic peace theory. But I kind of referred to that towards the end of my talk. And so what I should say is that seems to me to be an abuse of Kant's theory. So Kant seems, for me, I firmly believe that Kant's part of the solution, but obviously words of philosophers can be, well, I remember when I was preparing for this talk, Josep Borrell, the outgoing EU representative for foreign affairs, this year said that Gaza has become a graveyard for some of the most fundamental principles of humanitarian law. But if you look what he said in 2022 regarding Ukraine, he said something referring to Kant. To this year, he referred to principles of law. So I think this is an interesting idea that an event could bury the principles. But then in 2022, he said, well, we should be not Kantians, but Hobbesians. And he referred to this popular, like Europe should be more warlike in its disposition. And if you look serious at Hobbes on international politics and Kant on international politics, it's not that clear what he meant, but he obviously meant that we should be involved in somehow in the Ukraine war, and as long as it takes, and so on and so forth. But yeah, so I don't think, especially if we read the latest pieces by Kant, especially the one on perpetual peace, that despite his a bit earlier racist articles, that he could be reasonably used as justification. He can be abused, and he has been, but he can be abused properly used for European supremacy, because right he says a lot of bad things about the civilized barbarians from Europe who have done such things to countries in the Far East, and so on and so forth. So I very much believe that we can actually, by recovering in the way that Kavalar and Ripstein have done the Kantian structure of the idea of perpetual peace, and if we think in addition about the how we can develop his socio-economic hints and financial, he's part of the solution, and we can get even a very non-Eurocentric Kant, even by building on quotes that were mentioned in the first talk at the end. So yeah.
Okay, I think Gregor.
Thank you, Ognian. This was very interesting, and I think the discussion is also kind of interesting. It reminds me of the mad discussions. Like, if you have mutually assured destruction, then you also have peace. Like, this was actually defended by many people, that it's the nuclear power that actually helps us. It was the fact that both the Soviet Union could completely annihilate the world and the United States could also do it many times over, that this is what actually made peace possible. So that it was a cold war and not a hot war. So that's an interesting discussion, and some people apply that to the Middle East, which I think is a bad idea, but to be clear. But this idea of mutual destruction as a source of peace is kind of interesting. But what I really wanted to ask you about was, I think in your talk you beautifully made this metaphor of graveyard a big thing. And it made me think about how Kant uses death as basically the opposite of what he wants. The way I read the whole thing with the inn is that actually he's on the side of the innkeeper, Kant namely. Like, he does not want to have the peace of the graveyard. That's not the kind of peace that he wants to talk about. He wants to have the lively peace, the kind of the innkeeper wanted, the kind of you described as let's drink, let's marry. This is the peace that we would want, not the graveyard peace, obviously. And when I think of the Hegelian critique of Kant, would be precisely to take death as the source of life. I mean, this is, of course, this is a super Christian take on it, but I mean, in some sense, Hegel is a profoundly Christian thinker. He definitely thinks that death is not, the hindrance to life, but actually precisely what enables it. There is only life through death, if you want. And so this, I think, is the reason why Hegel thought that the very distinction between the graveyard peace and the lively peace is the wrong type of distinction, and that if there is such a thing as productive peace, it can only happen through death, and even if you want annihilation. Okay, this is darker than I thought it would be. This is darker than I thought it would be. But, and it's super metaphysical. But I just want to hear your thoughts on how you understand, because for Hegel at least, it's not just death. It's not just war. War is always connected to death. And for Hegel, death is a supreme concept, is a super productive idea of death. Sorry about this super long train of thoughts.
Yeah, from the innkeeper to Hegelian death. Yeah, well, I could make some maybe figurative references here, drawing away from Kant. So two things. First, going back to World War II, late World War II, and the film that I referred to, Tarkovsky's Sacrifice. So in a way, it's not really clear what happens there, but it's also a very Christian movie, and the main character does some sacrifice and some sort of, maybe not literal, but symbolic, or a lot of levels symbolic death to rescue the world from war. I mean, this is not philosophy, this is not theory, this is art, but the very Christian thing is that salvation could maybe occur through self-sacrifice and not through sacrificing other people, animals, and so on and so forth. Whereas war seems to be not entirely along this line of thinking. And the other thing that I would say refers to the productivity of death in Hegel, that maybe if we read the phenomenology and other places where he refers to romanticism, well, there's another, even more darker version of death that's non-productive, even according to Hegel, if you think about Novalis and his hymns on night and his yearning for death and so on and so forth. We have a very rich Hegelian critique of this notion of death. So definitely it's a topic worthwhile exploring, but it needs also some internal distinctions and qualifications. So I'm not it's not so clear to me how we can relate Hegelian theory of death and Hegelian theory of war, but I should think about it more. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, but very quick question, please.
Well, very quick and very boring. I don't know, perhaps I didn't catch it very good, but when you spoke about extermination war, you spoke about, you made the difference between the outcome and the internal principle. And I don't know if you refer to the normative status of the imperative of, so the fact that extermination war is absolutely forbidden for Kant. So what is the ground of this absolute forbod? It's not, is it the fact that it puts the whole mankind at risk, or is it another one? Because in my view, it would be a pragmatic imperative. If, in my view, Kant doesn't take in account the fact that war put human lives at risk. What do you think about it?
I think it works both ways. So, but the primary reason is the, so to speak, the pure reason that war should be, if at all, if it should occur at all, should be structured in such a way that we can reasonably exit it as soon as possible. So both, or like the 3 or 4 or several warring parties should at least maintain that they could at some point resolve their military dispute and conclude an honest and, so to speak, authentic peace with the other party. So it's not only about outcome. It's not that Kant doesn't care about that, but the guiding idea seems to me here to be this principle that war should be terminated as soon as possible, and that the two parties should be able to conclude a lasting peace. But then the two levels, I think, they in a way coincide. If we, I mean, Kant has those similar reflections when he talks about in his ethics about things like suicide and so on and so forth. So sometimes he describes exterminatory war as a project of collective suicide of the human race, right? So he says, well, what's wrong about suicide is maybe that you're wiping out reason from the world, right? So in a way, the two, the empirical and the a priori here, at some point they touch themselves. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, I think we ran out of time, so thank you again.
Thanks for the
Ognian.
question.